Okay. And I think we are live. So, what is up, everybody? Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, designers and designers to be. Welcome to today's workshop. I'm super excited. I'm always trying when I'm doing these workshops. I'm going to try to do my best workshop ever. So, I'm super, super excited. Thank you for showing up. We're going to wait a second for people to show up. So, in the meantime, you can drop where you're coming from today in the world. It's always exciting to see people from all over the world. In the meantime, I will say, yes, this is going to be recorded. And if you are, there's going to be a Q&A at the end, so you can drop your question in the comment thing and we'll try to tackle them at the end. And if you're watching this recorded on our website, there's this thing in the corner where you can click and send us your question and we will get back to you. And yeah, awesome. I see people from Brazil, from Czech Republic, from Nigeria, Haiti, India, UK. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Thank you all for showing up. I am going to share my screen, and without further ado, I'm going to get started with how to finally get Webflow. And the reason I called it this, I think talking with a lot of designers, I see that everybody is now hearing about Webflow and getting so excited about. They're hearing it's the next thing in design. Everybody's getting the Webflow ads these days. If you're anything like me, you're YouTube, on Instagram, all over the place, and you're seeing all of these beautiful websites that people are doing, award-winning website, like fantastic design, interactions, layout, all of these very cool things. If you're on Twitter like me, you might have seen all of these tweets raving about how many people are getting so many projects on Webflow. There's huge demand for that right now. People are making $100K a year over doing Webflow projects. When I shared this story a few years ago, I thought maybe I'm unique, but nowadays so many people are just sharing it like that. They're seeing unbelievable demand for it. And so maybe you're very excited about it. Maybe I got you excited about it. And so maybe you've even opened up your Webflow account and you said, I'm going to tackle this thing. And then you were like, oh my God, why does it has to be so complicated? Why is it so hard? I just don't get it. And so now you're in this YouTube tutorial hell where you're trying to watch every tutorial and you're here on this workshop today trying to figure it all out. And so my hope with this workshop today is let's fix this. Today, my goal is to finally get you to understand how to think about this, right? So that you have aha moments and you understand exactly what you need to do and how to move forward. So here's what's on my agenda. There's a lot. First of all, I want you to understand the mental model, like how Webflow works and how to think like a developer or more like a visual developer. And we're going to talk about layout and the most important layout concept. We're going to talk about responsiveness. We're going to talk about CMS. A lot of people struggle with that. We're going to talk about animations. And of course, I'll tell you how I think is the best way to go forward and become a pro. We're going to probably mention the Webflow Masterclass, which some of you might be familiar with. But even if you're not joining our courses, my goal is that this workshop is going to be so practical. We've got a bunch of demos for you. So you're going to take away a lot from it. And as I've mentioned before, we're going to end up with a Q&A, so stay at the end. If you've got any question on any topic in general, you'll get to ask them. Now, some of you might be asking, if you're here, if you're not familiar with me or with Flux or with our YouTube channel, you might ask yourself, like, wait. Like, there are tons of people talking about Webflow right now. There's tons of courses and videos. Why should we listen to you? So I want to spend a couple of minutes just giving you an intro and context about why I'm talking about Webflow and why I'm so excited about this. So my name is Ron Segal. I'm a designer. I'm based in Tel Aviv, Israel. And this is a photo actually from Yosemite with Vlad, the CEO of Webflow. So how did I became friends with Vlad, CEO of Webflow? Well, the truth is I actually got interested in Webflow right when they started it, right when they launched it in 2014. So back in 2014, right when Webflow came out, I understood how valuable it is and it made dramatic impact on my business. So I started teaching it here in Israel where I live and doing a workshop on it. And so I actually reached out to Vlad, the CEO of Webflow, to tell him, hey, we're teaching Webflow here. We're getting a lot of people excited and shared with him. And that actually got, he invited me to do some workshop back in the US. And that's actually how I first developed all of these Webflow workshop content. And actually, after working with Webflow for a few years, I ended up being at a position where I was building. This is one of my the last website I did as a freelancer, actually charging $50K to design and build this Webflow project. So it had a phenomenal impact on my business as a freelancer. But more than that, after training over 4,000 students, I know that the way that we're explaining and teaching Webflow works, and we're getting comments like this from Masha, which said, I come from a print background and I didn't understand how Webflow worked. I wanted to move into web design. I was wasting a lot of time trying to understand the process of designing a website with Webflow, and nothing seems to work. But now I'm able to structure websites properly and build them quickly, and I have more freedom. I don't have to rely on developers or building websites using limited platforms like Wix. So I hope that you now understand that I can explain to you how this works and we can get it done. And so I hope that you are ready, because we're going to plug in. And sorry if you're not a 90s kids with, I love the Matrix references, whatever I can pull them in. I am going to really give you a lot here. So I hope this doesn't become overwhelming, but come prepared because we've got a lot to cover. All right, so are you ready? Let me know in the comments if you are ready. We're going to get started right now. Okay, so how does Webflow work? Well, I think I found kind of an easy metaphor for you to understand and think about this. And I will start explaining by asking you the question of, like, if building a website was like cooking, right? If you had to cook up a website, what would that look like? And what would be your alternative? So one thing that you can do is get order in food, right? Get some ready-made food. And basically this is like what Wix and Squarespace did. Basically, they're giving you a packaged good, something that is ready-made. It's already a product that is already ready. Yes, you can customize it. Yes, you can tell them, hey, put some pepperoni on my pizza, or put some pineapple. I'd like this spicy or not spicy. You can customize it a little bit, but at the end of the day, it is what it is, right? It's kind of like a ready-made food. And that's one option that you have. Now, on the other side of the spectrum of cooking, for example, is growing your own vegetables, right? And this is what I would compare to coding up websites by hand, right? You can grow your own food. And probably if we check all the top Michelin restaurants in the world, like with the top chefs in the world, they probably do grow their own food. So if you want to have the most control about the food that you're cooking, you might want to grow your own food. However, growing your own food takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort. It's really hard, it's really dirty, and you might not actually need to do it, right? So what I think and what I compare Webflow to is just actually going into a really great supermarket. I don't know if Whole Foods is your thing, but a place where you can get access to the best, most fresh ingredients. And with them, you can literally cook whatever you want. Okay? So it's not ready-made for you. You don't have to go and grow them on your own, but you have the opportunity to cook whatever you want if you know how to select the right ingredients and you know how to cook them. So I hope this metaphor kind of helps you understand where Webflow is positioned in terms of the solutions that there are there. Now, one thing that kind of this metaphor hints is that you actually need to learn how to cook, right? Because going to the supermarket, if you don't know what to choose and if you don't know how to prepare these things, then that's not going to work. And I think that a lot of designers, they're coming into this thinking about Webflow kind of like they're thinking about Squarespace or Wix, where they're expecting kind of packaged good where they can just modify it if they want pepperoni or pineapple. But when they actually need to cook it, they're like, I don't know how to cook. I don't know what to do with this thing. And so that's why they are frustrated and they find it hard to grasp. So my goal with this, now that we kind of flowed with this metaphor, is that we need to, if you want to be a good cook, you need to understand what are your ingredients, what are you working with, and then how to use these ingredients, right? How are you going to cook them to make something tasty out of them? And so this is what we're going to cover here on this workshop. We're going to cover the ingredients that we're using within Webflow, and then how to cook them in Webflow, how to use them within Webflow. Now, I want to set the expectation before we go ahead and start diving into things. I think if this was a cooking workshop, if I would come here and I tell you, all right, I'm going to turn you into a chef in 1 hour. I'm going to cover all the ingredients in the world and all the cooking methods in the world, you would probably laugh because it's unrealistically to turn you into a world-class chef in 1 hour. And I think it's probably the true with web development or web design in general as well. I won't be able to turn you into a pro by the end of this workshop. However, it is my intention that you'll be able to at least cook a good omelet and not burn it as a first step, and then you understand the mechanism, and then you can go forward and develop your own skills later on. Okay, so now that we've kind of like basically covered the expectations and what we're going to do here, let's start talking about the ingredients and then kind of like the cooking methods of how to use them. So the first thing that we have, and this is the core probably element in web design, is called the Div Block. Okay, this is the #1 ingredient that we are going to use. And a Div Block, basically you can think about a Div Block pretty much like a box. Now, if you're not sure what that means, let me give you an example. So here's Apple's website, and if you go in your browser and you right click, you can actually inspect. And inspect basically means it opens up the code, and you can see in the code on the right that we have these things called divs, and every time I hover over one of them, you can see a box lights up on the left screen, which basically says this div represents this box. And as you can see, everything on this website, from every text to every button to the images to the navigation, everything is a box within a box within a box. And one more thing that you can note here is after, if you look at the code in the right side, you see something like div class unit copywriter. So this class is actually the name of the box, and we're going to talk about that in a second. So what are we doing with these boxes? What can we put inside the boxes? Well, we put other ingredients in this box. We put text elements in them. We put images in them. We put videos in them. We put links and buttons in them. We put forms in them. Basically, we put everything in them, including other boxes. Okay, so now we understand kind of like the core ingredients that we're working with, right? We have all these elements. We have boxes. What do we do with them, right? Okay, so the #1 thing that you need to understand, the #1, let's call it cooking method for these divs, is called styles. And like you saw in the Apple example, we give these divs a name, which is called a class or a style. And basically that defines what this box, how this box behaves and looks. So we define the size of this box. We define the fonts of all the elements within that box. We can decide on the color of the text inside the box or the color of the background. We can decide on the spacing of the box and how this box is going to be positioned. We're going to determine how this box is going to be interactive. And so let's go into a demo and see how this looks in real life. So I've got a Figma file here that I really quickly designed this thing, this, let's say, NFT shop. NFTs are now the thing. By the way, these are not my work. This is from Unsplash. But let's say I want to do this really simple design and I want to do it. By the way, there's below this video, there's a link to the Figma file and all the resources here if you want to follow along. So let's say I want to follow this. So I've got, and by the way, it's a good idea to always have your design ready in Figma or something like this. Just like you wouldn't go cooking if you don't know what you're trying to cook, because then you're like, oh, dang, I forgot to buy tomatoes and I don't have salt, right? You wouldn't go cooking if you don't know what you're trying to cook. And so I wouldn't go into Webflow to cook something if you're not sure what you're trying to cook before, because you want to bring in the resources and you want to be ready. So we've got this. This is what we want to prepare. And let's go here. And this is Webflow. And on the left side, I can add some elements. And you'll see here that the main thing that we have here, most of the other things are variation of this, is this div block, which is basically a box. So I'm going to throw this in here. And basically, we're seeing just a box here at the top. Now, before I'm going to style it, let's put in all the elements that we have here. So we have an image, we have a title, and we have this description, and we have a button. So I'm going to go here into the assets, and I'm going to upload a bunch of assets. Again, as I've mentioned, I put a link to these assets if you want to follow along. And I'm just going to upload them for a second. And okay, so let me drop inside the box an image. And you can actually see here inside this navigator that this image is inside, it's nested inside of this box. It could have been also outside of that box, sorry, but it's very important right now that we put it inside this box. So I put in an image. It's obviously big and it doesn't look how we want it to look, but let's roll with it for now. Now I'm going to add another text element inside the box. That's going to be our title. So let's say this is, let's call this abstract number 1. Abstract number 1, and I'm just going to copy and paste this, and I don't remember what is the description. This is new art. Okay, so let me call this new art. Obviously this doesn't look how we wanted, and I'm going to add another button here. So we already have an element ingredient called a button. So let me add that here at the bottom. Okay, and this is buy. All right, so now we have this box and a bunch of things with it. So let's start styling it. So the first thing I'm going to do, and I'm styling it on the right side. You can see we have this style, and we're going to give it a class or a tag. So let's call this item box, just so that we know what this thing is. Now, first thing is the size. So if I click here in Figma, I can see that this is 350, let's say, pixels wide and about 600 pixels to the top. I can just give here, as you can see, we have size, let's say 350. All of a sudden, it became smaller. Now, the next thing that we have, let's give it some space. So as you can see, it's spaced out from all sides, and it also has a space inside the box pushing all of the content that we have inside, right? It's not touching the border. So we can do that, as you can see here from the spacing, right? So we have space outside of the box, which is called margin, and we have space inside of the box that's called padding. So I'm going to add some spacing here. I'm just dragging it along, and I can actually hit Option and Shift if I want it to be spaced equally from all the sides. So I'm holding that, and now you can see when I'm just hovering over it, you can see those those blue lines outside of the box, showing you the space outside of the box. Let's do the same with space inside the box. So I'm holding Option and Shift, and now we have the green space is the green padding inside of the box, and the margin outside of the box. Now, what else do we have here? We have some drop shadow. So I'm going to scroll down here in my styling until I get to this thing called box shadow. And now I'm getting shadow properties that look pretty familiar from design software. So I'm going to change, the color and the blurring out of it. The last thing is we wanted to have round corners, right? So I'm going to we have round corners here as well. And I'm going to do some round corners. So now basically we have a box. Now these things inside also have their own styling, right? The image also has, I don't know why it has some stroke here. It looks like a stroke, but that's not what I want. Let me say that for this image, let me call this item image. I'm going to do round corners as well. So it has round corners. Now, remember I told you that if I set something for the box, let's say the font, let's say I'm going to choose something like Open Sans. Note that everything inside that box is being affected. So the fact that I chose Open Sans for the box means that everything inside of it got that font as well. So we can call this like title and make this bold and give it some spacing from top and bottom. And for the button, we can call it button. We can say that the button is not blue, it's actually black. And it also has a little bit of round corners. And we pretty much also wanted to have more inside spacing from left and right. You see how much spacing we have here from left and right? So let's push here in the padding from left and right 40. Yeah, so now maybe it needs a little bit more space from the top. But now basically we have this box with all of the elements inside. So we have master the super basic of understanding what a div is, how to use it, and how to style it a little bit. So let's continue and advance from here. Let's start talking about layout. Now, here's where most people, most designers coming from tools like Figma are confused, because in most design software, it doesn't matter if it's Figma, Sketch, XD, or Photoshop, or whatever, we're used to thinking in layers, right? We can just drop shapes or type on our screen, and they're just going to stack one on top of the other. Unfortunately, this is not how the web works, right? The web actually works more like a Google Doc or like a Word document where you put something, it takes up the whole space, and then the next thing comes, and then the next thing's done. So things push each other down, and pretty much like a page that starts at the top left, and then you can write things, right? You write and you write. That's how the web page works. You put an element, and it pushes everything down or down and to the left, and then the next element comes. So how do you actually create something like this where you have this cool layout and things are kind of like overlaying one on top of the other? Before we dive into that, let me just go back into the example here. And if we take this box item, and I'm just going to copy and paste it 3 times, maybe you assume they're going to be one next to each other, but actually they're one on top of the other. They're not behaving in the behavior that we might have expected. And this is because the default way that the elements are being laid out is called block elements, meaning they're taking up, and you can see from the icon, they're taking up the whole space and then pushing everything down. So it's actually, although it's just 350 pixels wide, it's actually taking up the whole space of this kind of like a section and pushing everything down. So how do we solve this to create all those interesting layouts that we want to achieve? This is where we need to talk about the second cooking method, which is called position settings. So by default, objects are what we call static. And that means pretty much like I just showed you, they're taking up the whole space if they are block elements. And we have the first element, and we have the second element, and we have the fourth element. And each new element is pushing down all the other elements. Now, we can start changing them, right? We can change from a static. We can say, hey, we want to move this object somewhere else. So if we do that, we can change, oh, I forgot to change actually this to relative. Sorry, I got my slides wrong. So we can change this into relative, and basically we can say, hey, move to the right, or hey, you can rotate. But what actually happens, although at object number 3 will move, it's still, object number 4 is still in its original position, because the space of where object number 3 original was still pushes that thing down. Now, this is the most, I think, counterintuitive thing in the world, and this is where a lot of designers, I think, are losing it, are like, I just pushed this element up and rotated it. Why doesn't element number 4 go up? But this is not how the web behaves. It still thinks that the object number 3 is in the same place, even though it's rendered differently. And for that, we have a different kind of like position, which is called absolute. Again, sorry for messing up absolute, for messing the slides, because I just changed them a minute before the presentation, which basically means that we can move object number 3, and it's not going to take up the actual space. And I'll show you in a minute how we're using it and practically what does that mean. The last option that we have is an option called fixed, and fixed basically means that we have an element that's not taking up space and it's fixed in the place. And you're very familiar with this object because most navigation in most websites are set to be fixed, right? They are on top of everything else, and no matter if you're scrolling, they're kind of like on top everything else. So you're very familiar with this, and it's very, very practical. Okay, so let's go through a demo and see how we put these things in practice. So as I showed you, basically, let's try and do this because we have this heart icon, and this heart icon is on top of the image. So how do we get it on top of this image? Well, let's go ahead and bring the image. We have the heart icon here. If I would just place it afterwards, well, you can see it's pushing everything down, and that's not what we want. We want it to be on top of this. So in order to group these two elements together, because they are basically this one element and they relate to one another, first I want to group them. And how do I group them? I put them in a box. So I'm going to create a new box, a new div inside the item box, and let me call this image wrapper. Every time I want to wrap a few objects together, we call this a wrapper. And I'm going to put these two things inside, right? The image itself and also this icon, little icon. I'm going to actually call this heart icon. I'm going to give it a name so that now I can style it. And right here in the position, you can see what I've mentioned before. This is static, right? So right now, it's taking up some space. Now, the next one here is relative. I've mentioned this. Now that I've defined it as relative, I can start moving it up or moving it to all kinds of sides, but you can see nothing is happening. The space is still being taken here as if the element is still here. So we're going to go back and we're going to change this into absolute. And now absolute, note what happened. It kind of jumped into a new layer and it's not taking up space anymore. So we're back to, this looks like this is not part of it, but actually it is part of it. And why does this matter? It matters because we can position this in relationship to, its parent element, the box in which it is inside. And here on the right, you can actually see that it says this is relative. Currently, it's relative to the body, right? So I can say I want this to be, let's say I want this to be at the top corner here. So 0 pixels from the left side and 0 pixels from the top. But I don't want, right now it's, again, relative to the whole page, and this is not what we want. I actually want this to be relating to this image. So to do that, I'm going to change this image wrapper from static to relative. And now when I'm going back here, you can see that this is relative to image wrapper. Why is this a good thing? Because to position it at the bottom left corner here, all I need to do is to say, put it 5 pixels away from the bottom and 5 pixels away from the right side, and you can see it's now aligned to the bottom. It's kind of big. We're going to change this, maybe change this to 50 pixels and 50 pixels and give it a white background so we can see it. White. Actually, just let's pick white. So now you can see that it's aligned to this bottom corner, right? It's going to be always, no matter what the image size here, it's always going to be 5 pixels from the right side and 5 pixels from the bottom. So now we've got something that is on top something else, all right? And to make this more beautiful, let's go and give this like 100 radius corner and also give it a little bit of padding to make the inside smaller. And now we basically have the layout that we have here, although here we have a little bit more space, so maybe we want to give it, I don't know, like 15 and 15. But we've managed to make sure that it's on top of something else, and also it doesn't take up more space. All right, so now that we understand that, let's move on to the next one, which is a very, very powerful concept that is called a Flexbox. Now, as you've seen originally, the boxes or the divs were stacking up one on top of the other. But sometimes we want it to be stacked differently. Maybe we want them to be stacked one next to each other. And maybe we want them to take up actually the whole space, or maybe we want them to be centered. So we are able to do this by turning the parent element, which is the outer box that you're seeing here, into what we call a Flexbox. And this thing allows us to create so many different layouts, very, very popular layouts that you're seeing on almost every website. This is one of the most powerful tools in web design in general, and let's see how this works. So in order to affect how all of these boxes are positioned, we need to give them a parent. We need to put them in a box so that we can turn that box into a Flexbox. So I'm going to create another box, and I'm going to put all of these inside of it. And I'm going to call this items wrapper, right? Told you that when we wrap something, we call it a wrapper. And now you can see here, we talked about this layout panel a little bit earlier. Usually, most things by default, they are display. But the next option here is the Flexbox. And when I click that, bam, all of a sudden something changes. And we have a bunch of new options here, right? We have how they are stacked out, horizontally or vertically. Now let's say we want them to be stacked out vertically. We can say, and let's say this box, we want this box to take up the whole screen. So let's say it was bigger than what we have here. All of a sudden, if this box, if the items wrapper is bigger, let's say 900 pixels wide, it tries to stretch them, right? It's trying to stretch the boxes. I don't know why. It looks pretty ugly. We can tell it align to the top, or maybe we can tell it align to the bottom, or maybe we can tell it align to the center. And as you can see, they are justified to the left, but we can tell them, hey, maybe you should center, or maybe you should align to the right, or maybe you should, be justified to the sides, or maybe you should have, equal spacing. We have so many alignment and positioning tools using this thing. And right now, again, I'm not even touching these items. I'm just styling their container and how we want to arrange the object within that box. So this is the Flexbox, and it's super, super powerful element that you'll be using a lot when working in Webflow. All right, let us continue. How are you doing so far? Are we having a good time? Oh, the picture is blocking what you're doing. Got it. Let me try to move this to the side like this a little bit. I hope that's better. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is responsiveness. This is something that a lot of people struggle with. And there's basically two things that you need to understand. And if you understand them, I think your life in Webflow are going to be way, way easier. The first thing that you want to understand is that the sizes of things don't have to be fixed. Okay, so far when we were setting up the sizes of things, I wrote 350 pixels. But we don't have to use pixels. We can also use relative things like 50%. And when we're using that affects, because we were not always, actually, we never know what the actual screen size of the user is going to be. So a lot of times we don't want the sizes to be fixed. We want them to be relative to the size of the screen. And so using relative measurements is something that allows us to be way more flexible in our design. We'll see that in just a few minutes. The next thing you want to understand is who makes the rules, like what affects what. And the best way for me to explain this is think about it this way. You're living in a country, and that country sets rules, right? And those rules, they affect everybody that lives in the country, right? But some states, of course, the rules of the country apply that states, but some states might overrule or change some of those rules. Now, when a state decides to change some of the rules, of course, it affects all of the cities within that state. It doesn't affect the country, right? And when a city decides to locally change a rule within it, it changes the rule of that city, but it doesn't change the rules of other city within that state. What that means is usually the rules work from the big organization to the smaller organization. And the same thing actually works when we are designing for the web. So what we define as styles, everything that we talked about from sizing to fonts to how things look and behave on desktop, that applies to tablets, that applies to mobile. But you can make adaptations. You can change the rules for mobile or for how things look on tablet, but those things, those changes in the rules, they're not going to cascade up, right? So they're changes that you make on mobile, they're not going to affect desktop. However, changes that you make on desktop will affect the mobile unless otherwise. So I hope that that makes sense. And you also think about it, you know, we were talking about divs earlier. So the styles that you define for a page, they affect all the divs within the page, and the styles that you apply to the div applies all of the different elements within it, right? So earlier on, I've defined the type, you know, the font for that specific box. Actually, that is a wrong way, because we want to define typography usually to be consistent throughout the website. So the place to actually choose the type, or things that are global, like the color of the type, because things that are consistent, probably I would create a style on the page itself, what's called the body element. It's like the most bigger box in the page, because the styles that I would, because then I wouldn't have to define the font again and again, right? The rules that I set on the page will apply on all divs unless I want otherwise. So now that we got this, let's go into a quick demo and see how that behaves. So we have this, what we've structured here. And here at the top, you can see that we have different, it's called breakpoints, right? So how does this look and behaves on tablet? And you can see that they're trying to be squeezed, right? And as we narrow down into mobile, you can see that the fact that we have 3 boxes, one next to each other, it's not really optimal to look at this way. This is not what we want to happen, right? So what we will do, let's say, this looks good, but here I just want 2 columns, right? I want this, and this, and the next one I want to flow to the other row, right? So that it's more readable and clickable and so forth. So the first thing I want to do is, you know, talk to the items wrapper of this Flexbox. And the reason is that right now, the Flexbox that we have created behaves a behavior that's called children don't wrap, meaning it's trying to squeeze everybody. If I decided that it's horizontal, it's going to try to squeeze everybody horizontally, even if it doesn't look very well. So what we want to do is we want to change this to wrap, and wrap basically means if there's not enough space, if you're trying to put them next to each other, but there's not enough space, drop it to the next line. And so what happens right now, because we have defined them as 350 pixels wide, and 350 plus 350 plus the spacing between them is wider than this whole thing, it doesn't fit, and so it just drops it into the next line. So let's try to make this a little bit smaller, and let's also try to use percentage based as we talked earlier. Let me see what happens if I do 35%. So I write 35%, and you can see what happened. This is now smaller. So two do fit, right? Do fit, and the next one is being aligned at the bottom. But the fact that I've used percentages here versus just making the pixel size smaller is that now, note when the screen increases, right, the boxes increase as well. If this was just, let's say, 150 pixels or maybe even 300 pixels, and the screen size would be a little bit bigger or small, you can see their size remains fixed. But when I change this to be 35%, now if the screen is a little bit bigger, they're going up, they're growing relatively to the screen, but they're always in a position where there's just 2 columns here, right? And when we go down, let's say this still works, but this definitely doesn't work. So on mobile, let's switch this to 100%, right? On mobile, I do want to have just one and then the other ones. So now I've made modification for the size property. And you can see that the fact that I've changed the size property here on mobile to 100%, it doesn't affect the behavior. It doesn't affect this when it was 35, and it doesn't affect the desktop, which is 350. So this tried originally cascaded down from desktop down to mobile, but we've made modifications along the way. And of course, we can make a lot of modification, not just the size of things. We can also change what's visible. We can change the text sizes so that it looks great. But this is how things cascade down. And once you understand these 2 concepts of things cascading down and the ability to use relative sizes, then you'll be able to pretty easily turn your website into a responsive website and make sure that it adapts nicely. All right, on to the next cooking method, which is the CMS. CMS stands for Content Management System, and a lot of people can't get their heads around it. Like, what is this? How do I use this? What is it good for? So we're using content management system basically for things that we want our clients to be able to edit, right? Because some things like blog posts, for example, or products or team members, it doesn't make sense that our clients or future people who will be managing this website will have to actually create a new page every time they want, to create one or more of these items. These are items that are rapidly changing, or they are part of kind of like a database where we just want to add more and more to them. So the way that we do this is basically we look at these elements, and these elements can be whatever, as I've said, from a blog post to a team member to a product or an album in this case, and we define what are the components of this repeatable element. So in this case, this one has a name, this one has a rating, this one has an image to it. And once we do that, once we define the content structure of it, basically Webflow turns this into a very simple form, and then it's super, super easy for you or for your clients. It's super easy to either edit or add new items to our what's called collection of items to work with. Now, let's see how this works very, very easily. So in this case, we have obviously 3 items, and all 3 of them have the same components, right? They have different images. So image is one of them. They have a product name, and they have some kind of a description to it. If this was a real shop, maybe they would have, different prices or different something, but let's stick to this very easy example. And the way that we create the CMS, or we create a structure, we go here into the CMS tab, and we create a new collection. Okay, so this is going to be a collection of items. So I'm going to call this items. This is the name of this collection. Now here is what content do we have? So by default, we have a name. So we don't need to give this a title because we already have a title. And we're going to add an image because we have an image. I'm going to call this image. And it also had a description. So let's call this description. And I think that's it for this thing, right? We have images, and we have name, and we have description. Let's say this is enough for this. So I'm going to create this collection. Now this collection doesn't have any items. So I'm going to create these 3 items. So the first one is going to let's call this abstract number 1. And I'm going to upload the image here. And this is my first art. All right, let's create this. Let's go ahead and create 2 more so that we can see how this works. Let's call this abstract number 2. Number 2, we're going to upload an image here as well. This is my second art. And the third one, let's call it abstract number 3. And upload it. You can think about this as portfolio pieces, and it can be so many things. So this is my latest. All right. So now we have basically a collection or a database with 3 items in it. Now let's see how we basically tie that in so that Webflow knows to pull this data into the design that we have. Now to do that, we need to bring in a new element from here, and this element is called a collection list. I'm going to drag it here above these things, actually, and you'll be able to see it. And it asks us, the first thing it asks us is, what is the source? Where should we take the data from? And I'm going to connect it into the items collection. So you can see immediately it created 3 boxes that are called abstract number 1, abstract. So it brings the data here, but it doesn't know how to present it. So let's look at how this looks here in the navigator. You can actually see that it is comprised of a collection item, 1 element, and then a wrapper to this list, and then another wrapper. Now, the reason we only have 1 item and we don't have 3 items is because we designed this once, because we don't know how many. We can have 10,000, right? But we designed them once, and the design is going to be applied to all of them. So basically, we need to bring in this design into this area where it's pulling the data from the collection. So let's actually just we already have the styles, right? So this style is called item box. If I'm going to apply it here, it's going to get the same style. So you can see I'm just starting to write it and Webflow will complete it. So item box, this is item box. And the wrapper is items wrapper. So let's do items wrapper. Bam, you can see now it took everything from like 900 pixels to the Flexbox. It has now the exact same layout. We just need to bring the actual content inside. So inside this image box, it has image wrapper. I'm just going to drag it inside this box. And then we have the text, and then we have another text, and then we have the button. All right, so I moved it here. I can actually delete the old thing that we did. It looks the same, but it's now actually inside a collection, meaning we can tie the data in, right? So let's go and click the image, and from the setting, I can say, hey, don't get the image, I brought it from the library, image one. Get it actually from the database. Get it from items, and we only have one image here, but we're going to pick this. And now you can immediately see every one of these items got its own image, right? And now we're going to tie in the other thing. So this headline, we're going to tie it into a text from the name. And this one, we're going to tie it into a text from the description. And so now we've got this whole element, and it's pulling the images, it's pulling the text, it's pulling all of the different data from the actual database, and we can even connect the button that when people click it, it maybe just goes into a very specific, into the page of this specific item and whatnot. And now we have dynamic content. And as I said, this can be portfolio pieces, this can be team members, this can be whatever blog posts, this can be whatever you want. And this is a very, very powerful tool and concept. All right. Let's continue. All right. The last thing that we're going to cover here is animation. Everybody's excited about animation. A lot of people are actually worried or I don't know, confused about this. So it's actually very, very simple. There's actually 3 types of animation. I'm going to share them with you and explain to you when you're going to use each one of them and how to use them. It's actually not as complicated as you might have thought. However, I'm going to drink first because I've been talking a lot. All right. So let's talk about the 3 types of animation and then do a quick demo. So the first type of animation is simply a very simple style animation where the actual style changes between states. The second thing that we have is a more complex type of animation where we have a trigger, and that trigger triggers some kind of an animation. We're going to see what that means. And the third type of animation is called loading animation, and this is basically just means that you're bringing in an animation that you have created in something like After Effects or something like this, and you can bring a very, very complex and powerful animation inside your Webflow project. Let's see how that looks and when you might use each of them. So style animation, let's look at this. So when we have, let's say we have this item box, right? So we have the style, we have defined how it looks, we have defined the spacing, the margin, we have defined everything here in the styles panel. Now this box has multiple states to it. So if you're seeing here in the selector, I've got this drop down button and we can see the states. So we can choose the state of how this thing looks like on hover, meaning when our mouse is hover on this box. So now I'm styling just how this is going to look like when I am hovering on top of it. And now I can do things like, let's say I want to move this up a little bit. So I'm going to scroll down and we have here transformation. I'm going to click this move and I'm going to move this up a little bit. Right now, it looks like all 3 of them are moving because I'm adding a style that affects all of them. But when I will hover on top of one of them, only one will be affected. Let's actually see this. Let's go back here into state of none. I'm going to, hover over one of them and it goes up. Wow, this looks fancy. All right, let's do one more thing. Let's take this item box again. Let's go into the hover and let's also say that the shadow that we have is, getting a lot of distance. And I think this can be cool because it looks as if the item is getting farther from, from the page, and that's why it's dropping a shadow that's more further away. So let's see how that looks like. Oh, now it gives us a very cool kind of like a 3D effect where it looks as if, it's going up, but it's actually coming up. Now, this is pretty cool. It's pretty cool, but I don't know that I would call this animation, right? Because it's not really transitioning from one state to another. So if we want to add that transition, what we do is we go back into the normal state of things, and you will see here transitions. So basically, we can choose how long each one of the properties that we have changed, how long it's going to animate. Now, for the sake of very quick simplicity, I'm just going to go here into all properties. So all properties are going to animate for a duration of 200 milliseconds. And let's see how that looks like. So now it's way more smoother, right? Actually, let's make it, instead of 200, let's make it 350. So it's like slower and nicer. Oh, so now we actually have already a very fancy animation here because it's scrolling, it's animating, it's easing out. It's very, very nice. And you saw how simple that was? So for hover animation, for very simple hover animation, all you need to do is just switch here into the hover state, redesign it, and then decide how long the transition is going to be. Very, very simple. Okay, let's talk about the second thing, which is an animation that is being triggered and it does something more complicated. So let's say when I click this like button, it does something fancy. So let's click it, and then let's go here into the interaction palette. This is where you do the fancy stuff. So here you can see that we have some triggers, and triggers means what happens to make this animation happen, right? So let's do a element trigger. So this is something that happens to the things that you have selected versus something that just in general happened on the page. So we want this to trigger an animation when we click it, right? So I'm going to do mouse click, and now it asks me, what do I want to do? So I actually want to start an animation, and I'm going to add a new animation. I'm going to call this animation click button. And now I basically have a timeline. I can create a timeline for what I want to happen. In this case, let's say I want this button to rotate, right? So it's selected, so I know I'm already affecting it, and I can do multiple things to it. So let's choose rotate, and it's asking me what's the state at the beginning and what's the state at the end. So at the beginning, let's say rotation of the z-axis is 0, and then we're going to duplicate it so that we have an end state. And in this case, the end state happens after half a second, but we can change it, let's say, to a second, right? Just for the sake of it. And then we can say after a second, in the end position, let's change the rotation to 360. So this would have completed a full kind of rotation. And I can click play here and see how that looks. And you can actually see that it's going to rotate. Now it's rotating kind of in a very boring way because, it's what we call in animation linear animation, right? It just starts at the same rate and finishes at the same rate. But I can choose here some very nice easing so that it's kind of like going from slow to fast, or even something like bounce, where I click and notice what happens. Bang, they're like bouncing. So we can choose some pretty cool things here. Now we've animated rotation, but let's do something else. Let's animate the color as well. So let's say that it starts as, we can choose to style the background color. And we know at the beginning, I'm going to say this happens at the beginning, the background is white. We know that's what we have right now, but actually we want to duplicate, and at the end state is also going to take a second. Let's say that, oh, sorry, I duplicated the rotation. I actually want to duplicate the background color. And along with the rotation, let's say it changes to whatever, red, or let's say this greeny green. So now I'm going to hit play, and note what happened. It did a rotation and changed the color. Both of them animated. I can save this now, and I can now preview, and I can click. No, we've triggered this by clicking, so I can click. Bang, this one element animated. I can click this. Bam, this element animated. And with this, We can do very, very crazy things, including all the parallax things. So when we are scrolling, so we can add page trigger while we are scrolling, right? Things are going to move, things are going to change, things are going to fade, and so forth. And that's how we create a lot of very intricate animations and interactions. The last thing I want to show you is the Lodi animation. Now, Lodi animation, as I said, you usually create it and export it from After Effects. But if you want, you can also go to something like Lodi Files, which is a great resource. It's basically ready-made exported animation that you can just download and use in your project. And it's very, very cool. I just searched for heart and found a bunch of very cool animation, as you can see here on the screen. And you can even change their color, and you can do a bunch of things here. So I have already downloaded and we uploaded. Oh, we didn't upload it. So maybe it's in the Lodi, right? So we've uploaded. I have an animation here. You can see it starts off gray and then bang, it does this very sweet animation. So actually, let's replace this thing. Let's replace it with the Lodi animation. So let me go here and bring in this thing, and I'm going to put it here. And this is called heart icon, so I'm just going to give it the same style so it looks the same. Heart icon, and it's positioned the same. So we have it here. It's just a different, looks a little bit smaller. So now what happens, I just placed it. If we just, preview the website, bang. The animation will just naturally play, but this is not what we want. We want this to trigger, let's say, when we're clicking this. So just like we did before, we can go here to create an interaction. I can say when somebody clicks this, this is going to Lodi playback. So this is going to play when it's clicked. And you can see, we can go here and now I can click, bam, the animation plays. And in this case, I don't know why they decided to end the animation on a blank frame. We can fix this, but this animation works now. And with Lodi animation, the possibilities are unlimited, because basically any animation that you can create on After Effects, you can implement on your sites. And this opens up the way for tons and tons of creative stuff. All right. So I hope I didn't overwhelm you. Now you're telling yourself, all right, I think I get it. There's ingredients, there's how to use them within Webflow. I get it. But I think I'm feeling like a little bit like overwhelmed in the kitchen, and I want to feel like I want to be in that position where I can already cook everything. And I love it. And I think that, to be honest, it doesn't have to take years to do that. I think that, you can make this transition into feeling comfortable with all the tools that I just shared today, and much, much more, relatively easy. And I want to take a minute to just share what I think is the best way for you to get there. And I'm saying this based on the fact that we have over 4,000 students who have vouched that this is just the best way to learn Webflow today, and that is the Webflow Masterclass. So what you have in the Webflow Masterclass is based on a few different things. The first thing, like the core of it, is a video course that we have built the most effective curriculum to get you from just starting out confused to becoming an actual pro. So that includes deep dives into all the concepts that we covered here today and many, many more. However, we know that your time is limited, and we know that you want to just get it, understand it as fast as possible so that you can get on and work on your paying client project and not just spend time on tutorials. So we have made sure that we have the most effective curriculum to get you going as fast as possible. And this includes practice projects so that you can actually practice and see that you understand, and you experiment with all the different concepts that we cover here and in the course itself. Now you're going to finish the course with an actual website, a responsive one-pager that you can use in your portfolio under your belt. And I think the most important component of our program is the fact that you get 12 months of feedback and support from our group of coaches. They are professional Webflow experts, and they will help you troubleshoot, debug your website, understand how to think and how to do whatever you want. And this is phenomenal benefit. We know that people are stuck, and when they're stuck on actual client project and there's nobody to help them, this becomes very, very frustrating and becomes a huge problem. And so we are here for you to help you understand how to move fast and how to solve any problem that you might have, how to think about whether this is feasible, what's the best way to accomplish something. Our team is here for you in our community of, again, 4,000 designers who have been where you are today, excited to help you and collaborate with you. We have in our community, so many designers are hiring each other, collaborating with one another, finding projects. This is really, really a huge part of our program. Also, for the people who are going to submit the project that I've mentioned before, the one-pager that you'll be building throughout the project, you'll be getting the Flux Webflow certificate, and you'll be welcome to join our weekly live events where you get to hang with me, you get to ask any question you want. We're doing live event, private events for our community on a monthly basis. And so I believe this is the best thing that you can do if you want to become pro at Webflow and you want to master this and be able to use this to take your design business forward. This is the best investment that you can do. So you might be asking, all right, so how much is this? Am I going to need like a college degree thing for this? Not at all. Is this like one of these boot camps? No, all of Flux courses cost $695. And not only do I think this is like a phenomenal value for what you're getting, some people are just taking for a community more than what we're taking for the whole course, including the community. We're offering 30-day money back guaranteed. No questions asked. If you think this is not the right fit for you or if we did not deliver for you. All right. With that said, let's jump into the Q&A and let's have some fun. Let me one thing that I want to do is start on the air conditioning here because I am hot. So drop your questions in the comment. I'm going to turn on the air conditioning and we're going to dive into a little bit of Q&A. All right. All right. All right. I'm looking at some of the questions that we have collected for you. All right. So how big is the learning curve from Editor X to Webflow? So the truth is Editor X, well, obviously they're trying to compete with Webflow, but they have still chose to not treat their elements kind of like true, as I've presented them here, web design ingredients. They have still tried to dump them down and turn them into kind of like a component that would require less learning, right? So they understood that Webflow, the thing about Webflow, it's very, very powerful, but it has a learning curve. They tried to decrease the learning curve to Editor X by kind of like simplifying and dumbing down their components. And so if you're now on Editor X, you probably don't really understand what's going on. You still are not maybe familiar with concepts or even terms like we talked today, like divs and Flexbox and all of these terms that we covered today. So there's still going to be a learning curve because Editor X is still kind of like a drag and drop interface, although they are trying to get more closer to the way that Wix works. Do you have access to the community after the 12 months? Yes, you do. The 12 months is only for our coaches and support, but access to the community, you get access to the community. What is better, this or HTML, CSS, JavaScript? You know, I think I've kind of answered this before when I said, you know, you can either go to the supermarket to buy your food or you can grow your own vegetables. I don't think there's necessarily better. It's just what do you want or what do you need? If you want to grow your own vegetables, I'm not going to tell you that it's bad to grow your own vegetables. It's pretty healthy. But if you want to write your own code, HTML and CSS, go ahead and do it. I don't think there's anything better. I simply think that for me and for a lot of other designers, it's not really efficient to hand code websites, most websites today with HTML and CSS yourself. What else do we have here? What is the difference between a container and a div block? Don't they are the same thing? So, right, Webflow has some elements within it that basically they have just tried to make things faster for you. So they basically, a container is just a div where they already just said it has a maximum width and it's centered. That's it. You can do your own containers, and basically that's what I do, and I also cover this in the course. My preference is to create my own containers just from normal divs because it allows me more powerful customization. But if you want to speed things up, you can use Webflow's container, although I think it's a little bit too small. But basically, yeah, it's a div. They've already put some kind of styling on top of it to make things faster for you. Is it possible to build sites from a mobile-first perspective, or is Webflow built with desktop-first mindset? So you need to understand, desktop-first, it's not a mindset. This is just the way CSS and HTML works. It, as I've mentioned, it cascades down from desktop to mobile. This is not something that Webflow created. This is just how, how the web works. If you want to design a website from a mobile first approach, that's fantastic. Go ahead and when you're doing the design process, think about mobile first and design it first. But when you build it, note there's a difference between when you design it and when you think about it, think about how you want things to look. When you do that, usually in Figma, and when you implement it, when you actually build it in Webflow. So design with mobile first, but build from desktop first and then to mobile. I hope that makes sense. What is the advantage of only using percentage in tablet and mobile and not desktop? There's not advantage. Sometimes I use percentages on all breakpoints, and sometimes I might use fixed sizes on mobile. I just wanted to show you how they both work. You choose what's right for you based on how you want your elements to behave. Sometimes you want your elements to be fixed no matter what the screen size is, and sometimes you want them to resize based on the screen of the site. So it's just, it's just a behavior that you pick. You don't necessarily have to use either one of them. You use the one that best fit the behavior that you're trying to build for. The follow-up question, so in what cases pixels are best used? Pixels are best used when you want things to be fixed in size and you want to precisely know the size of this thing. Is it mandatory to put containers? In which case can we not use them? So containers, for people who don't know what containers is, if you will visit most websites, you will see that most of the content in the website is not going all the way from left to right because it's just on our wide screens today. It will require us to look left and right. And so we are basically defining a container that sets the maximum width of the content so that it's centered within that space. It's not mandatory, and it's based on your design. For a lot of things, it makes sense because you don't want people looking left and right, but a lot of times you would want to use the whole space. So it's not mandatory, it's a best practice, and you need to think about your content, your design. I think it's more of a design decision than a development decision. If you have designed with the intention of having content centered in the center of the screen, then you need a container. But if you have designed something that is more freestyle and using the whole space of the screen, then you might not use a container. It's based on your design decision. All right. Can I add a custom cursor effect in Webflow? Yeah, I think you can. Can you create login users to save their info? You can currently with third-party tools. There's a lot of tools that integrate into Webflow and give you this functionality. I think Webflow are building this right now. Very soon it's going to be natively possible, but right now it's only possible by integrating with other services. Do you build the style guide before the website? Yes, I do. This is a little bit too advanced for what I wanted to accomplish with this workshop, but in the course, we do recommend that you're using a style guide before, and then when you're starting to build, everything is much faster. What else do we have here? The pre-built elements. What are necessary? Menu buttons, search forms are very tough to style. Well, that's pretty vague. I don't know how to answer that, or what's difficult to style. I know there are some things like checkboxes that are not easily customizable, but most other things are they can be customized. Can I host my own hosting server? Can I host on my own? With Webflow, you can basically export your website to code, download the code, and go host it wherever you want. Obviously, when you do that, you won't be able to use things like the CMS or e-commerce or all kinds of form functionalities where if you host with Webflow, they provide all of the kind of like back-end functionality. But if you want, you can download, it will download the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, so you'll have your animation and everything, and you can go and host wherever you want. Does Webflow offer installment plans like Afterpay? In general, Webflow is a subscription, so it's installments. All right, I am from motion design and print background. I don't know about server, domains, and so on. Do you teach these things in the course? We do teach you how to connect the website to a domain. So yeah, we do teach you how to connect it to a domain. We don't teach you, I mean, there's not too much into it. But if you do want to understand all of the different consideration, what are the CMS alternatives, where to buy your domain, and that kind of more stuff, we actually cover that in our web design program, more of understanding the structure outside of Webflow. But in the Webflow program, we do teach you how to connect your website to a domain, which is rather simple. Budget-wise, how do I convince my client to pay Webflow hosting and management? Well, the way that I usually explain it is if you look at the time savings of using Webflow in terms of updating the website, updating designs, and that kind of stuff, usually if you calculate the time of both their team or them hiring you or them hiring a developer, you see that the savings are in thousands of dollars yearly. Again, assuming, let's say, clients who are paying US salaries, then obviously the savings are huge. And in that case, paying, I don't know, $200, $300 a year on hosting to save up thousands of dollars, if not more, usually makes sense economically. How does Webflow rank? I guess you're talking about SEO. So that is great. A lot of times it beats WordPress, but I think that really depends on so many factors. So I don't think that it improves or detracts the fact that you're using Webflow. Hey, Ron, how long does it take to finish the course? That really depends on how much effort you put into it. In terms of video content, the course is 12 hours of content, but you do have to actually do some work in order to put that in practice. So some people who really want to finish this as fast as possible, they can pound through it over a weekend, right? But most people take the time, they actually build the project, they ask questions. So it usually takes them a couple of weeks to finish the project. But the course is self-paced, so you can do it as fast or as slow as you want. All right, a few more last questions. Do you cover the Webflow e-commerce in your course? We do, but we don't go too much in depth into it. And the reason is that for most designers in our community that are building e-commerce websites, the truth is Webflow's e-commerce is just not powerful enough. And so they are still using either Shopify or embedding other solutions into their Webflow projects or exporting the Webflow website and taking it over to Shopify or something like this. So we do have an e-commerce section. It's not that in depth, just because there's not too much depth to it at the moment. But we are working on a full e-commerce course at this time, and so which would be Webflow and beyond, and the other platforms and e-commerce in general. Okay, last question. Do you know if Webflow has ever been used to build just the UX UI for custom web app development? Yes, definitely. I have used it in my previous company, which was called Prospero. It was a web app for creating proposals for freelance designers. And we have built the whole front end of the app on Webflow, and then, wrapped it in React and turned it into an app. So yeah, definitely. And I'm a big advocate of it. Although right now there are some platforms that integrate actually into Webflow to turn it into web apps. And so I think the future is very, very interesting. Okay, I'm going to wrap things up right now. Thank you so much for showing up. It was such a pleasure hanging out with you. I hope you found this presentation beneficial, and I will catch you next time. Have a fantastic rest of your day.